Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Living Manna Church. Hi, I'm Pastor Dave Sains, Senior Shepherd here at Living Manna. It's Wednesday night, which means it's Bible study for us. Thank you for joining us tonight. For those people that are just starting to log on right now, I appreciate you giving me the time and opening up your Bibles with me tonight and getting into Abba's Word. Got a couple of just brief announcements or just some information, some commercials I want to get out of the way. First of all, if this is the first time you're checking us out, if you're watching and you enjoyed the message, do us a favor, certainly hit the subscribe button and also the bell so you're notified every time we go live. Be part of LMC. You can certainly give us a thumbs up if you enjoy the message, if you're fed by the message, if you like this kind of content. Please give us a thumbs up. It'll help this message get out to other people that are like-minded. And of course, we definitely could use your support. We're not monetized here on YouTube by YouTube. Everything we get comes in by the offerings and the gifts and the favor of those that are watching. So if you have not yet downloaded the LMC app, please do. And when you do that, there's all sorts of information on there about how you can give, how you can support this ministry, but also just be part of LMC, be part of our chat room, be part of all the messages and the studies and the morning mannas and all sorts of things that we got going on. You know, throughout the week, we invite you to be part of the LMC family. And speaking of LMC family, we have a brand new addition to the LMC family today. Hadassah, welcome to the world. Congratulations to Brandon and congratulations, of course, to Jennifer. We're so happy for you guys. She's finally here. We hope that mom and baby are healthy and everything's going well. And you too, Dad. You did a good job. So congratulations, guys. We can't wait to see you and be able to speak with you. But our hearts go out to you, and we are so happy, and we're rejoicing with you. Okay, I think that's all the commercials for today. I know there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, craziness. We're sort of all sitting on pins and needles, waiting for the next shoe to drop, so to speak, in the Middle East. When that's going to happen, of course, nobody knows for sure. But certainly, this is a time for prayer. We are watching prophecy happen right in front of us. We are heading closer and closer to the time of the coming of the end of the time of the Gentiles, which means we're coming closer to the time of the Son of Man and his return. And so what I'm looking for is the sign of the Son of Man at some point in the sky. Well, we'll see what tomorrow brings. But certainly, keep our world in prayer. We'll probably talk more about this on Friday night with Brother Max. Don't forget to join us Friday night for our Hidden Manna. Looking forward to it. We missed last week, so I'm looking forward to this week. And I think those are all the commercials for today. If you got your Bibles, open them up. We got a lot of stuff to do. The notes are going to be available. You can go into the description box, or you can go to the app. You can download the notes. Tonight's study, we are continuing where we left off before. We are in the midst of the study called The Name, the Mark, and the Number. The name, the mark, and the number. And I have no idea how long it's going to go. We're going to try to take it a little bit slow. I'm going to try to shorten today a little bit because there's a lot of information, but I don't want to overwhelm everybody. So we're going to try to do this in pieces. But it really is important that you watch all of the studies. You go don't skip one. Take the time. Go back, listen to it again, go over the notes. And week by week, it's going to all start to build up and hopefully and prayerfully make sense to you. And I hope today actually makes some real sense to you because we got some really, really important stuff to talk about. All right, so with all of that, let's open up with a word of prayer and jump right into it. Abba, give us eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart that's willing to obey. In the Master's name, amen and amen. Okay, so the name, the mark, and the number. Now, today's title, or subtitle, if you would, is called Another Gospel. Another Gospel. Now, that should start to get some of you guys thinking already. Those are verses that should be familiar to you. It's going to fit right in all of this end time stuff that we're talking about, that we're actually living, believe it or not. But hopefully it'll start to make sense. But these should be some familiar words to you. another gospel. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start right off in the book of Revelation, chapter 13, because we're going to be in Revelation in multiple places in the book of Revelation. We're going to be in the book of Thessalonians. We're going to be in the book of Daniel to try to get the story out and to understand what the story is about, the book of Ezekiel. So we're going to be, moving in quite a few different directions, trying to put the whole story together, because it's about the story. You got to get the story. We've got to understand what the bigger story is. We can work on the details, but once we get the bigger story, the details are that much easier to start to piece together. So I want to read Revelation 13. Now, I put some PDP, yellow paraphrases in there. And of course, that's just me sort of commenting and giving you my insight into what we're talking about, or what I think the writer is talking about. So pay close attention. Now, some of this we've talked about before. We've been building up to this for a while. So some parts of this in other messages we've gone over. We've talked about some of these things. So some of it is going to be familiar. Other parts of it you may read and say, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that that's what it meant. Well, hopefully you'll get that feeling throughout the entire study as Abba opens up our eyes. All right, so let me make this bigger so everybody can see it up on your screens. Oh, and by the way, oh my goodness, by the way, before I even jump into this, guys, thank you so much for praying for Sister Karen. Obviously, she's had her surgery. She's been out of the hospital now almost 2 weeks. She is doing better. And we are so, so happy. And I just wanted to say thank you to everybody that's been praying. Please keep praying. We want this to be obviously a permanent change in her. But we are. It's so neat to see the old Karen back. And so thank you guys. Thank you. All right. So now all the commercials are done. All right. So Revelation chapter 13, and we're going to start at verse 11. We're going to go back to 13, and we're going to look at some other verses as well, the verses before this, but not tonight. I want to go from verses 11 all the way to 18, because this really encompasses the idea of the name, the number, and the mark. So Revelation 13, verse 11, it says, "And I saw another beast." Now I'm putting in there in the PDP version so that we've got some context of when it says beast. It means nation. Nations are beasts. But in this particular sense, it's talking about the religions of the nations. When you see the lion, the bear, the the leopard with multiple heads, it's the nation, but it's also the religious spirit behind the nation. And that's what we're talking about here, a nation and a religion that comes out of a nation. So he says, I saw another beast, a religion/nation, coming up out of the earth. This one's different than the former beast. They came out of the sea. This one comes out of the earth. We touched on this a little bit with the Latin name for the Ishtar pig, but coming up out of the earth. And he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon. This is a sacrificial animal, and we as I said, we talked about the concept of the Ishtar pig before, the whole celebration of Tammuz. Tammuz is killed by a wild boar. He is gored to death by its horns, and he dies. And for 40 days, we can read this in Ezekiel chapter, I believe, 8, the women of Israel are praying for, they are weeping for Tammuz. Today we call that Lent. It is the beginning of the countdown to Easter, Ishtar, the day of the resurrection of Tammuz from the dead by Ishtar, the fertility goddess, or Easter, the fertility goddess, which is why Easter is the celebration today among the Babylonian religion around us. And on that day there is a resurrection. And on that day, of course, the meal, the food that is eaten, both historically and even today, is Easter ham and cross buns. And so that is the one who died before. And I've thought about this, and I've come up with some different ideas and concepts, but I really think it's talking about the religion, the story that has plagued Israel throughout what we call the Old Testament, throughout the prophets. It is Ishtar. It is Tammuz. It is Semiramis, who is Ishtar. It is the sun god. Those are the things that have plagued the house of Israel and brought them into the judgment that they have received over the millennia. And I think that's what this is talking about. So this is a resurrection that it's referring to, but it's not the resurrection you and I are thinking of. It's a different resurrection. It's close. Like I said, it looks like it has cleft, their hooves are cleft, but it's not a clean animal. Anyway, verse 12 then goes on to say, and he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes all the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast. So the first beast is Babylonian religion. Well, another Babylonian religion from the perspective of the writer John was about to come on the world. And this is going to be the great deception, the great deceiver, the thing that's going to fool everybody. It says, let me underline this right here. It says, the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. Again, we're talking about Tammuz, the resurrection, the Easter pig, all of that stuff. And he does great signs. This religion does great signs. The one who is the key to this religion, the focus of this religion, in that name, great signs are done, so that he even makes fire to come down from heaven on the earth before men. Verse 14 says, and he leads astray. And I put it in there, the PDP, because this connects us to everything. He leads the world astray with another gospel. He leads astray those dwelling on the earth because of those signs which he was given to do before the beast, saying to those dwelling on the earth to make an image to the beast. Now, I again, for clarity, every time it says beast here, it's actually talking about a man. You're going to see that because it's going to be defined in a couple of verses, but I'm giving it to you before John actually defines it. So the beast is a man, or at least an image of a man, an image of an anointed one, a pseudo-resurrection. Make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword, died, yet lived, Tammuz. And obviously everything of this religion that reflects that story, but is told a little bit differently. Verse 15, and there was given to him to give spirit to the image of the beast. And I put in there, not just spirit, to give life, to give a religion. A religion gets attached to this story, to this beast that has come on the world, to this thing that's brought by a nation that becomes a religion that encompasses the world. Spirit is given to it. A priesthood is given to it, to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many to be killed as would not worship the image of the beast. So this beast is going to force the world to worship it. And that is exactly what wound up happening in history. I don't want to get too far ahead. We'll get to that, probably not tonight. But the beast did exactly that. This beast, because there's another beast that comes after this. And that beast we're watching today. That beast is surrounding Jerusalem today. That beast is in conflict with Israel today. But this beast is the one that Revelation 13 is focusing on, at least for now. So verse 16, right here, guys, so you can see. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given a mark, a symbol upon their right hand or upon their foreheads, and that no one should be able to buy or sell except he that has the mark or the symbol. We'll get into that, probably not tonight. We'll get into that in depth a little bit later. It says, or the name of the man, the beast, or the number, and I put in there, just for clarity, and we'll define it more later, but when it says number, it's really referring to like an emblem, a pictogram, not a literal number, because I know that there's a whole lot of people trying to figure out the name of this beast, and we're using things like gematria and trying to figure out whose name fits in this numerical system. But I don't think that's really what it's saying at all. I think it's talking about a pictogram, a picture that Ab is giving us that is going to identify this individual's name. Verse 18 says, here is, and so to get this, to get to the point of understanding this, he says, here is the wisdom. He who has understanding, let him calculate the number of the beast. And we'll get into all the definitions of what's actually being said here another time. But let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. So that's why we put the word man for beast in all the other versions. This is a man, or an image of a man. And his number, of course, is 666. And you're going to find out when we finally do get to it, that's the pictogram. That's the emblem that he's referring to that identifies. It is the marker. It is the identifying mark of this individual. And once we go through it all, it really is amazing. But as John the writer says here, or as is being said to John, this takes wisdom, and this was not going to just happen overnight. This has taken a lot of time to be able to look at, to understand, to see history play out before us. And we certainly are in a unique position right now as human beings because history is behind us. All of the biblical history, if we are at the end of the sixth day, if what's going on right now really is what it seems like is going on right now all around us, then all of this is history. And we have a unique perspective to look back and to fill in the gaps and to understand. And of course, as Abba has said, as we've talked about before, Father is going to give men of wisdom in the last days, men of understanding in the last days that are going to be able to put these things together and speak to the body and show exactly who these people are or what this story is all about. All right, so that's just a cursory reading of it with, some little tidbits out there that maybe you can, chase down on your own. But the general story, right? So this is where we're going to be planted for a while as we go into the name, the mark, and the number. All right, that being said, let me ask you a question, and it's a rhetorical question because I'm going to give you the answer. But what is the gospel of Messiah? Right, if we're going to put it probably in its most, basic format, he came, he died, he rose on the third day, he ascended to heaven. Yeah, okay, that's absolutely the gospel. But there's a whole lot more to the gospel story than just that. And here is just a quick summary. But if you agree with the things I'm going to say, and for who we are, what we're doing, this is our understanding of what the gospel is. The gospel is that the God of Israel sent the prophet like Moses, the long-awaited prophet like Moses, the Messiah, the Mashiach, the son of David. And that son is Yeshua. And I'm going to use the name Yahusha too, because we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Yeshua or Yahusha, this prophet that came, explained the Torah and the prophets, the mysteries of the kingdom that people did not figure out prior to. The kingdom, of course, the name of the kingdom is Israel. And this Messiah, this prophet, this Mashiach, son of David, he instructed his followers to walk as he did. That is, to walk according to the commandments as given by Father through Moses. He claimed mastery over the Sabbath, and he became a sacrificial Passover lamb. He died a sinner's death on Passover, removing the stain of sin on unleavened bread. And he rose 3 full days later, and this is important, he rose on the Sabbath. That's why he is the master of the Sabbath. He ascended to the Father as the first fruits of those born from the dead on the feast of first fruits. He has established a covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, and he gave gifts, the gift of Abba's Spirit, now allowing the nations to be grafted into this covenant and kingdom and live Abba's law in our hearts. And of course, he will return, the conquering King of Israel, to establish a Sabbath kingdom. All right, just a summary, but that's a pretty darn good summary. That really, if you're going to explain the gospel to somebody, that's the gospel. And I know that's not normally what we hear, but that's the gospel. That is the basic story. And of course, there's a lot more detail we could put into it, But that really is the basic story, so that you know exactly what God we're talking about, exactly what Messiah we're talking about, exactly what he did and when he did it, all of it prophesied. That is the story. And I want us to keep that as sort of a baseline, a foundational thought. If that's the gospel story, and it is, well, what else is there? Now, we sort of attacked this question a couple of weeks ago. Does the name matter? Of course, by name, I mean the name Yeshua or Yahusha, or the name Esu or Jesus. Does the name matter? And we talked about the Latin definitions of the name, or at least of the name Jesus. But I want to backtrack a little bit, and I want to go back to the Greek. We've spent, I don't know how many weeks, be it morning mannas and other studies, on names, on how important names are, how important details are. The definitions of things are extremely important to Father, because, you know, Father hides things. He hides things in words. He hides things in numbers. He covers truth very often, most of the time, so that only those, of course, with eyes to see are going to eventually see it. And names matter. Words matter. This past weekend, we talked about Bereshit. We talked about just one word in Hebrew, Bereshit, which, of course, in the English is in the beginning. It's 3 words in English, but it's 1 word in Hebrew. Does the word in Hebrew matter? Does it give us more information than an English equivalent? Yes, absolutely. If you haven't checked out that study, go back and listen to last week. That name, that word, Bereshit, gives us a world of information in the Hebrew that we do not get in the English. Now, you could read the translation in English and say, okay, in the beginning. But unless you understand the Hebrew part of it, you realize there's a lot more being said there than just in the beginning. It's a much, much bigger story. It is literally in the first word of the opening book. It is the description of the entire covenant that Father is about to bring upon the world. It's the story. It's the thing Father spoke into existence. So do words matter? Yes, 1,000 times over, words matter. Do names matter? Yes, names of people, names of places. They absolutely matter to us. And if Abba can hide a wonderful and amazing truths in the Hebrew names, we can also do it in the Greek and in other languages as well. But Abba gave this to us in the Hebrew language, which means he picked it. He picked those people. He picked that group. He made that language to get his story across to us. And we can do a bang-up job trying to translate it. But really, at some point, if we really want to get into depth of what this thing is about, at some point, we really do have to go back to the Hebrew. And wonderfully, we've got Google translators, we've got concordances, we've got, all sorts of great aids out there that will help us understand the Hebraic part of this story. So does the name matter? Now, I know that you guys know this. We've talked about this before, but I want to do just a little comparison here. We did this with the story of the Ishtar pig. So on the one side here, and let me just circle this, you've got what we would say in a modern way today, Yeshua, or Yahusha would be a more ancient way of saying it, and probably more accurate. And what does it mean? It literally means Yah's salvation, the Mashiach, the King of Israel. That's who he is. That's what the name means. The name means Yah's salvation. And under that name, the name we use, the concepts, the ideas that we hold, just like I just described sort of the gospel message, here's another little summary of it. Under this name, under this person, he's a sacrificial death. He's the Passover. He keeps Father's instruction, the Torah, and tells us to keep Father's instruction, the Torah. He absolutely kept Sabbath, says he's the master of the Sabbath, and encourages and teaches all of us to keep Sabbath as well. And he memorialized all the feast days and taught us the things that were coming on the different feast days. It's a clock. And of course, he instructed us to eat the Passover lamb, the bread and the wine. This is my body. This is my blood. All right. So under the name Yeshua, in our understanding today, this is who Messiah is. This is the story. This is the gospel. We know this because we've all come from it. There is no denying this. This is painfully obvious that in our world today, under this name, whether we say, and there's I got a whole bunch of different ones here. Obviously, the most modern way today is Jesus, which of course is an English derivative of the Latin, and the Latin is Jesus. But by 1st, 2nd, 3rd century, the word Esu, which is the Greek, now that's how you write it in English, but that's how you would say it, Esu. And there is another XP right here, which is another reference to the to Jesus, or IES, or IEC, or IHS. As time went on, as history went on, as languages evolved from Greek to Latin, from Latin to English, and all the different those three letters, IES, which is the first three letters of the word Esu, get changed, not changed. The letters change a little bit. The meaning stays the same in that it's a reference to Esu, or what we would say today, and you probably heard the term, we've probably all heard the term before, Jesus H. Christ, right? We've all heard that. Ever wonder what that meant? What it means is Jesus, or Jesus, Horus, Christ, or Krishna. Jesus H. Christ. And on every church, everywhere in the world, if they've got a communion table up in the front, engraved in the wood, because it's more of a Latin thing today than a Greek thing, but engraved in just about every congregation there is, you will see this, IHS. It's engraved. It is I for Jesus, or Esu, H for Horus, or the E, it used to be the E, and Christos, the S. All right, so, but what comes under the story of this name? See, the story under this name is not the same story you and I understand under the name Yeshua or Yahusha. The story under this name is a sacrificial death for humanity and a resurrection. But it's a sacrificial death that has no connection to Passover. Under this name, there is the doing away with, the removal of the Torah, the law, because it is considered a burden. Under this name, there's no keeping of Sabbath. As a matter of fact, a new Sabbath has come upon, Sunday, which is considered the day of resurrection. Instead of the master of the Sabbath, under this name, it is resurrection on a Sunday, 40 days after what we would call Ash Wednesday, or the weeping for Tammuz, because that's how Tammuz is absolutely intricately involved in this story. That's a Babylonian religion that's sort of been remodified into a modern religion. Under this name, or all of these names, from its Greek manifestation to its Latin manifestation to its English manifestation, there's no keeping of the former feast days. Now there are new feast days, other feast days that are not associated with anything that came before, and that actually are all associated with former pagan holidays. And of course, under this name is not the eating of the Passover lamb, but again, is the eating of the Easter ham and the hot cross buns, Ishtar, the Ishtar pig. This is a reflection of the story that has plagued Israel, like I said, all the way from the book of Ezekiel and even before. So this has been going on for a while, but this is the manifestation of it today. And what are the headings for these two very, very different concepts? Because, beloved, I mean, just take just bird's eye view. Look at these things side by side. They are not the same thing. Matter of fact, they are diametrically opposed to one another. However, they look similar to the untrained eye, to someone who doesn't know the story, who hasn't really read their Bible. It looks similar. And for a lot of people, that's about as far as we take it, and don't really look as deep as we should to understand that there is a difference. So it's under a name that we have two different sets of belief, two different sets of understanding, two different stories. And both stories cannot be true. You cannot have your foot in one of these stories, one foot, and a foot in the other story. It just does not work like that. The master himself says, got to decide who you're going to serve, right? You can't serve two masters. Neither can we. We must decide which story is the true story as we read it from the scripture, which story is the true story, and then act accordingly. All right, so review, I know for some, but this is going to make sense in just a second. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So we know that. The slide we just looked at, we've talked about, I don't know, maybe a half a dozen times already. We've seen this. We get it. We get that there is a difference between the religious world that we've come out of and what we are trying to do now, how we are trying to walk. And it's not just the name change, though the name is really important. It's all the story that's associated with the name, that comes under the name. So you and I, you know me, I love charts. So here we are. Here's a chart for us. So we're going to talk about the name. And I know, sometimes people, this is tough stuff to really wrap your mind around. This is stuff that people have been trying to figure out for a long time. And when you actually begin to hear the truth of what this is about, depending upon which side you were on, which risen Savior, which name you were under, this can become either really liberating and open up your eyes, or this can become really offensive. And that's just the way it is. And I get that. But our desire should be to want to understand truth. We all should want to do exactly what it is that Abba expects of us. That's what I want to do. I want to serve my God the way he has prescribed for us to do it. And so the name is important, and the story that is associated with the name. So it is a fact at this point. So we've got a fact in history that has already occurred, right? This is a timeline. So we've got a fact. We have the fact that Messiah is the Passover. We've got the fact that he died on Passover, in the grave on unleavened bread, rose on Shabbat, ascends on first fruits. That's fact. Gives the Spirit on Shavuot. He's connected to all of those things. We can show you scripture after scripture where he says to keep the commandments. Anybody who tells you not to keep the commandments, at best, they would be the least in the kingdom, if they make it to the kingdom at all. These are things that are non-negotiable with us any longer. We see these. We understand these things. Right? So we have a solid reference to look at to understand the truth of the gospel. And you and I, here 2,000 years later, we're looking back in history. We have the ability to look at everything that happened from this solid date on. And what we have seen from our vantage point is not just the breaking off of two very, very different names, but two very, very different stories associated with both of those names. And this breaking off, this division didn't start 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 500 years ago. It started in the first century. And we can now, because we are here at the end of history, look back and have an opportunity to see it, an opportunity to understand it. There are two things happening. There is the true gospel that is being projected to the world, a witness to the world. But there is also a lie, a deception. And what we would call that other story would be anti-Messiah, in place of Messiah. Another Messiah is being taught to the world. This is where we are today. And again, whether you understand all the stuff about the name and the etymology of it, and all those kind of wonderful study things, what you absolutely should know for right now is that. You should know that. You should know that there are two very, very different stories. So we've got a fact. Let's work our way back from the fact and go into the etymology of the name and where all of this stuff comes from and what the history is. And you're going to see that this is an amazing story that is working out right before our eyes. So if there is a lie, a deception that is being told, here's Revelation chapter 12 and verse 9. It says, "And the great dragon was thrown out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who leads the whole world astray." What the enemy is doing is not leading a group of people at the end of the age astray. He has led the whole world astray. This is not something that's going to happen at the end of the age. This is something that has been happening for a long, long time. And you and I now have the vantage point, not just to see it, but Abba is giving us men of wisdom that can explain it now, that can explain it in a way that is satisfying intellectually, spiritually, historically, and practically. We know the difference between what goes on under one name versus what goes on under another name. Here's John chapter 5 and verse 43. And these are some ominous words, guys. Ominous words. Listen to Yeshua's words in John chapter 5 and verse 43. Now they're going to make so much more sense to us. The master says, "I have come in my Father's name." Now, we're going to get into in a second. What he's referring to is yes, he comes in the authority, because to come in someone's name means that you come in the authority of someone. But like Abba always does, there's always a play on words here. There's always multiple layers of meaning and truth. He actually literally came in Father's name, because his name in Hebrew means Yah's salvation. And he says, "You do not receive me." And of course, the leadership of Israel didn't receive him. But look at what he says. "If another comes in his own name." And again, PDP version, just trying to clarify this a little bit, or throw a little spiritual tidbit in there. By comes in his own name, I put in there, comes in another name that is not Messiah's name. So he comes in Abba's name, in the name of Abba's salvation. Another one is going to come in another name that is not the name Abba's salvation or Yah's salvation. And look at what he says. "Him you will receive." And just like Revelation 12:9 says, this deception has gone out into all of the world. All right, let's take a look. Next slide. I want to show you something. The heresy historically, it's not the second, the third, the fourth century that things start to go awry. It's the first century. As soon as this message goes out, as soon as this story starts to go out, really not just from the Jewish leadership that rebelled against it, but also from many of the Gentiles who started to attach themselves to it, but quickly, because they had no root in them, changed things, put things into the story that really weren't the story. Did not like the idea that this was a Jewish story. Did not like the idea that the people who were the leaders of the church were men from Jerusalem, Jews. The Jews were a hated and despised people even back then. And so heresy starts, one of the places that it winds up starting historically is in Antioch, is in Galatia. And the seeds of this story, just like when we read in Revelation, I think we did it in a morning manna over a couple of weeks, you see all the problems and the things that are going on in each church of the end of the first century. And you can connect those things both with persecution from the Jewish world, but also persecution and twisting of things from the Gentile world. This is going on at the end of the first century. So even before all the apostles are dead, Satan, just like we read in Revelation 12, he's trying to lead the world astray. He does not want this message to take root. Now, obviously, if Father's hand is on it, it's going to take root, but he's fighting. He's going to do everything he can to twist it. And I put a little map up here for you so you guys can see this. This is Galatia, right here. This whole area here is called Galatia, and in Galatia is Antioch, and Antioch becomes the ground zero for heresy, or becomes ground zero for what will eventually become Roman Catholicism. And of course, that will spread to Rome, that will spread under Constantine. But the seeds of all of that, the seeds of creating another story, separate and different from the Hebrew story, removing ourselves from the roots. We use the term all the time, Hebrew roots. Our faith must have Hebrew roots. They didn't want Hebrew roots as a faith. They wanted Greek roots. They wanted pagan roots. And over time, that's exactly what they did. So here's the beginnings of it, right? So this is already happening in Galatia, in Antioch. There's already mumblings. There's already things going on that are going to wind up, spreading poison all over the world. But here's Galatians chapter 1 and verse 6. Listen to Saul's words. I marvel that you are so readily turning away from him who called you in favor of Messiah to a different good news. Guys, we just showed you. We just looked at, there's two different gospels today, right now. There's probably a lot more than that, but the two major ones that very, very, very different. It was going on in this day too. To a different good news, a different story, which is not another story. Only there are some of you who are some who are troubling and wishing to pervert the good news of the Messiah. The serpent is doing that and is using all of his minions to do it. When? In the first century. However, even if we or a messenger, meaning an angel, out of heaven, brings a good news to you besides that which we announced to you. So what's the good news? The Hebrew Messiah came. The prophet like Moses came. The sacrificial Passover lamb came. He rose on a certain day. He ascended on a certain day. He is the master of the Sabbath. He is a covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. That's the gospel story. So he says, if anybody comes to you, however, if we are a messenger out of heaven, bring a good news to you besides that which we announced to you or which we just finished going over, let him be accursed. Wow. Let that sink in for a second. Let that percolate for a second. You bring a different gospel, you will be accursed. As we have said before, and now I say again, if anyone brings a good news to you beside that which you have received, that we've listed, let him be accursed. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3. Saul again says, but I am afraid, lest as the serpent deceived Eve by his trickery, So your minds should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Messiah. He's talking about, go back to the story of Eve. What happens? The serpent lies. The serpent tells her a lie. Twist Abba's story. This is what's going on here in the first century too. A lie. Another gospel was starting to form already. And the ones really that are going to take control of it are going to be the Gentiles. Verse 4 says, for indeed, if he who is coming, and I put the PDP version in there, because prophetically, who's the one that's coming? Oh, we just read it in Revelation 13. A beast, an image of a man, another religion based on Babylonian religion, another religion based on a death and a resurrection, another religion that refutes, gets rid of the Torah, another religion that wants nothing to do with Sabbath, another religion that does not want the feast days, another religion that creates all of its own feast days based on pagan religions. That's coming. That's what he's speaking about. So if he who is coming, the beast, the false prophet, proclaims another Messiah, and the word there is Yahusha, that's how it's actually spelled, whom we have not proclaimed, or if you receive a different spirit, which you have not received, or a different good news, which you have not accepted. And here's his fear. And his fear was founded. His fear is that you'll put up with it well enough. And you know what we did? Well, we did exactly that. Well, not all, but many. Many. For a long, long time, we put up with it well enough. And you're going to find out in just a second that throughout every generation, Abba has had his people, the branches, the Netzarim, the people of the way. In every generation, he has had them. But they have fought through and moved through time, just like we saw on our chart. Let me go back to this chart a second. Just like we saw in this chart, the story of the Netzarim here and the true gospel is moving through time, but at the same time, the lie and the deception is going to deceive the whole world. And they look close if you do not know what the true gospel is really about, what the story is really about. Okay, so where does all of this start? Historically, it starts in Antioch, and it moves from Antioch to eventually to Rome, and then it's all over the world. It's all over the world today. Here is some historical information, because I want you to see this. I want you to see that it's not just you and me now, right? It's not just you and I waking up at the end of the age. Though obviously we are waking up at the end of the age, which is wonderful. And yes, we're beginning to understand what the real story is. We're beginning to say, hey, wait a minute, this is what we're told, but that's a different gospel compared to what I'm actually reading. All right, so our eyes are opening. But it hasn't just been us, guys. It's not just us. This has been going on in every generation. The first disciples, the first apostles, they got it right. And the people they spoke to got it right. It's as time went on, by the end of the first century, that you have the nations coming in. You got the hatred from the Jews for the Netzarim, but then you have the hatred of the nations for the Jews. And an entirely brand new religion that's similar, that's based on similar books and concepts and ideas, but it's just not the same gospel, also pops up. Here is Jerome. So now we're talking like 400 years, almost 400 years from the time of Messiah. There's still Netzarim. They're still there. But there is also Christianity. Christianity as Rome would have defined it. Here's Jerome, and let me just highlight this for you guys here. Here's Jerome in the 4th century. These are his words. This is from his commentary on Matthew. Recently I read in a certain Hebrew book that a Hebrew from the Nazarene sect brought to me, the Apocryphon of Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, in which I found this text written word for word. So why do I show this to you? Because this lets us know that 400 years later, after almost 400 years, in the 4th century, after Messiah, there are still Nazarene. There are still people who believe like you and I believe today, who understand what we understand, who see two different gospels. And it's very, very important. And it's wonderful that we have the record to look at, except that this has been hidden from us. Nobody knows this information. We're never taught this. Nobody shows us this. But here it is in black and white, preserved for us throughout history by the quote unquote church fathers. But they did this right. They preserved the history for us. All right, so he comments there's Netzarim in the 4th century. Here's Epiphanius, also in the 4th century. Let me read this to you. It says, Epiphanius of Salamis, this man helped to establish the Roman Catholic Church in the 4th century. But not just establish the Roman Catholic Church, the dogma, the teaching, the doctrine of Christianity that would become the template for all Christianity, every name, every denomination, every group, everywhere, all over the world, even today. The core of it is this man is part of it. And in a book that he writes, and I'm just underline here so you guys can see where I am, in his book called The Panarion, also known as Against Heresies. So the English translation would be Against Heresies, which was written between 374 and 377 CE. So again, close over 350 some odd years from the time of Messiah. So, I mean, that may not sound like a lot, but America's not even that old yet. A lot of time has gone by, and we're going to find out there are Nazarene there. And there is an issue between what the Nazarene do, what the Nazarene understand, and what Christianity understands. And Epiphanius wrote this about the Nazarene, who he called the Nazareans. Just, I guess, his way of saying it. So here it is. Now, let me give you the definition of Nazarene, right? Because hopefully you know it, but if you don't. Literally, Nazarene means branches. When the Messiah says, I am the vine, you are the branches. That's the Nazarene. We could say the people of the way, but the Nazarene, these are the early believers. But Nazarene, again, words matter. The definition of Nazarene throughout the entire Torah and the prophets shows us a couple of things. It literally is translated as watchmen. The Nazarene are going to be the watchmen, and I don't want to go back to that chart, but the chart of the two arrows. There's going to be watchmen to preserve the truth throughout the timeline. While there is this other story, this anti-story, that is also big, pervasive, and gets lots and lots and lots and lots of people sucked into it. So it literally means watchmen, guardians, protectors. Again, it also means branches, as in an offspring, an offshoot, a descendant. Now this hopefully makes a little bit more sense. Knowing what Nazarene means, Revelation chapter 12 and verse 17, it says, and the dragon was enraged with the woman. He went to fight with the remnant of her seed, her offspring, the watchmen, the guardians, the protectors, the Nazarene, the branches. And what does he do? Or how does Revelation 12 define this seed, these branches? Here it is. Those guarding the commandments of Elohim and possessing the witness of Yeshua Messiah. So what is, at least from a purely biblical perspective, what is a Nazarene? What is a branch? What is the guardian? Who is the watchman? They are those of the seed, the offspring, who keep the commandments of Elohim. Well, that already puts early Nazarene in total opposition with what the Gentiles are doing by the end of the first century. Because already by the end of the first century, and definitely by the third century, the fourth century, there was such a divergence. They had gone in two totally different directions, where one was absolutely saying, you don't have to do that anymore. That's not what we do. That's not who we are. No more commandments. They're a burden. No more Torah, yada, yada, yada. But this is telling us, this is the story. The Nazarene, the serpent's going to go after them. And he did. And he did with a vengeance, and he still is today. So here's from the book. Here's some quotes from the book of Epiphanius, his book called Against Heresies, written again in the latter part of the fourth century, or the early part of the latter part of the fourth century, almost 400 years later. So here's the first one. Follow along with me. This is chapter 1, verse 2. Look at what this man says about the Nazarene 400 years later. For these people did not give themselves the name of Christ or Jesus. Now we're reading an English translation of it, a modern English translation of it. When he wrote this, there was no person ever in all of human history ever called in the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th. In all of those centuries, there was never anybody called Jesus. Never happened. But he's writing it here because that's the term that would be used today. But when Epiphanius writes this, he's using the word Esu. So let's read it again. For these people, the Nazarene, did not give themselves the name of Christ or Esu, but that of Nazarenes. Guys, this is important. They did not call themselves Christian. They called themselves the branches, the Nazarene. Black and white, history. This is history we're reading. Chapter 7, same book by the early church father. Remember, this is the guy that puts together with Constantine, everybody else, the dogma that we have today. Here's chapter 7 and verse 1. But these same sectarians, the Nazarene, so he's talking about them as, troublemakers. They're separate. They're different. Sectarians, who I am discussing here, disregarded the name Esu. Stop a second and let that sink in. Let that sink in for a second. One more time. But the Nazarene, the sectarians, 400 years later, who I am discussing here, disregarded the name of Jesus and neither called themselves Jesseans. There was a group that called themselves, descendants of Jesse, which is where the whole Jesseans come. So they didn't call themselves that. They didn't keep the name of the Jews, nor turn themselves Christians. Guys, I'm not making this stuff up. You can look this up. The references, you got the name, look it up. It's there. It's history. You cannot refute this. Here it is. The Nazarene did not term themselves Christian, but they called themselves Nazarene or Nazarenes, supposedly from the name of the place Nazareth. Supposedly. Of course, really, I am the vine, you are the branches. But, and so here's his take on it all. But to me, they're Jews in every way and nothing else. So he totally dismisses the Nazarene. Excuse me. Sorry, guys, a little dry. He totally dismisses this people, this sect, this group of people, saying they're just Jews. They're just Jews. But here's chapter 7, verse 2. He goes on to say, they use not only the New Testament, but the Old Testament as well, as the Jews do. For they do not repudiate the legislation. So it means the law. So what was the church doing? they were repudiating, get rid of, has nothing to do with us, the law, the prophets, and the book, which are called the writings by the Jews and by themselves. So he's saying, we've rejected that stuff. They didn't. And they're in error because they didn't. They're not like us. So he's speaking of them as heretics, but really, they're actually doing the truth. It says they have no different views, but confess everything in full, according with the doctrine of the law, and like the Jews, accept that they are supposedly believers in Messiah. For they acknowledge both the resurrection of the dead and that all things have been created by God, and they declare that God is one and that his Son is, again, this is the writer, the English writer here putting it in there, Jesus Christ. Again, it would have been written Jesucristo or Yeshua, Mashiach. Wow. 400 years later, and they believe in Messiah, and they keep the commandments. The very thing Revelation told us, that Satan is going to go after these people. And what's happening here? Satan, through this man, and through a whole bunch of others, because the history is just horrific of what actually happens, they go after him. All right, let's look at some more history. Excuse me. Chapter 7, same book by same gentleman. And I put that in pink there. I hope you guys can see that. Put that right up here in pink. That's going to become important in a second. Again, speaking about the Nazarene, he says they are perfectly versed in the Hebrew language. He's not talking about Jews here. He's talking about former Gentiles and Jews who have understood who Messiah is, who 400 years are still fellowshipping. And what are the Gentiles learning from their Jewish brethren? And what are they reading? What are they understanding? They are perfectly versed in the Hebrew language. They didn't have concordances back then, and it's probably not as big a deal to learn multiple languages back then as it is today. In fact, probably most people around the world know multiple languages, except maybe Americans. We're kind of selfish. We're stuck on English. Everybody's got to speak our language. But here it is, guys. What language were they speaking? What language were they reading the books in? And if they were not using the name Jesus, and they were, or Esu, and they were not using the name Christo, which is not what I'm telling you, it's what he just said, then what name do you think they were using? The Hebrew names. They are perfectly versed in the Hebrew language for the entire law, the prophets, and the so-called writings. You can see how arrogant this guy is. I mean, the poetic books, Kings, Chronicles, Esther, and all the rest, are read in Hebrew among them, as, of course, they are among the Jews. So again, he just disqualifies them. They're Jews. Even though they're Gentiles or former Gentiles and Jews, a mixture of people, they're Jews. Sound familiar, huh? Verse 5. Look at this. I put it in a color there so it pops out at you. Listen to this. They are different from Jews and different from Christians. Only in the following ways. They disagree with the Jews because of their belief in Messiah, but they are not in accord with Christians because they are still fettered or chained down, burdened. That's the doctrine as it comes up. It's from the Gentile church. They are fettered by the law. Circumcision, the Sabbath, and all the rest. By all the rest, of course, he means the feast days and Passover and all of that stuff. That's all a burden. So what he's actually saying is we, the church, we don't do that. These people who are of low intellect, they're doing it. That's them. But really, they're just Jews. chapter 9, same book, verse 1. He says, in this sect too, my brief discussion will be sufficient. People of their kind. No, that doesn't sound racist at all, does it? People of their kind are refutable at once and easy to detect. And rather than being heretical Christians, which that would be okay by his standard, but rather than be just heretical Christians, they are Jews and nothing else. And we can go, we'll look at another time, all the things that the church fathers say about the Jews. They hated the Jews, despised the Jews, just like today, just like it's been for the last 2,000 years. And the Nazarene, we're right in the middle of it. Verse 2, it says, yet to the Jews, they are very much enemies. Not only do Jewish people bear hatred against them, they even stand up at dawn, at midday, and toward evening, 3 times a day when they recite their prayers in the synagogues and curse and anathematize them, saying 3 times a day, God cursed the Nazarenes. He's right. That absolutely happened. And it still does today. That absolutely happened. They hated the Nazarene. The Jews hated. Saul tells us this in Romans chapter 11. For the sake of the gospel, they are your enemies. But for the sake of the calling, the gifts and the calling of Abba are without repentance. Well, just 300, 400 years later, it's still going on. The establishment Jews, the ones in charge. Now it's Pharisaic Judaism, because that's all that's left 300, 400 years later. And still today, and I put it in here so you guys, if you guys want to look this up, you guys can look this up. The prayer that he's referring to, which is still there today, is called the Birkat Hamanim, the prayer to curse the heretics. You can look it up. You can go online. You can look it up. You can get the prayer, and they literally pray against the Nazarene, because from a Jewish perspective, the Nazarene were Christians. To the Christians, the Nazarene were Jewish. And so they were stuck in between two worlds that hated them. But it was the Christian world that would do the worst to them. Verse 3 says, for they harbor a further grudge against them, if you please, because despite their Jewish origin, or let's say their Hebrew roots, they preach that Yeshua is the Messiah, something that is the opposite of those who are still Jews and have not accepted Jesus. So, wow, what a window into the life of the Nazarene. 400 years later, the life of the Jews that have rebelled and refused to look at who Messiah is. But there are Jews and there are Gentiles who have come together in faith in Messiah and grown community and learned the scriptures and speak his real name. That's the kicker. They speak his real name, and they will not do what the Gentiles are doing in this thing that they are creating. Chapter 9 and verse 4, he goes on to say, they have the gospel according to Matthew in its entirety in Hebrew. Now, wait a second. If they got the Gospel of Matthew in Hebrew in the 4th century, I'm sure they got 1 Peter, 2 Peter. I'm sure they got the book of Hebrews. These are all written explicitly to synagogues, which would have been written explicitly in Hebrew. I'm not saying there aren't books written in Greek. Of course there are. But he's telling us the gospel story was written in Hebrew. For it is clear that they still preserve this as it was originally written. Wait a second. What was it originally written in? Hebrew. It was written in Hebrew, in the Hebrew alphabet, he says. Here it is right here. Just going to underline so you guys can see it. In the Hebrew alphabet. But I do not know whether they have also excised the genealogies from Abraham to Messiah. So he's like, I don't know if they follow all the genealogy stuff, so-and-so begat so-and-so, which is right out of the gospel according to Matthew, chapter 1. Okay, so if you want a reference for this, or you want to find it, this is it right here. It's called the Panarion of Epiphanius Salamis, which its name means Against the Heresies. This is the second edition, revised and expanded, and translated by a scholar named Frank Williams. So when you see the Jesus and the Christ, that's more is modern way of translating it. Now here's another guy in the 13th century. Right, so it's over 1,000 years later, and they're still talking about the Nazarene. This guy's name is Let me see if I can say that right. Bonacursus. Again, you see the U.S. there. Bonacursus. In the 13th century A.D., he has a book called Against Heretics, where he mentions the Nazarene. Same people this guy's mentioning, doing the same things this guy is mentioning, having the same beliefs this guy's mentioning, not being like others and being hated by Jews and also being hated by Christians. And he calls them Nazarene, but they're also called, in that day, 1,000 years later, they're called the Pasagini. The Pasagini. So here is direct historical evidence of what the Nazarene were doing that was different. They were following what Saul, what Peter, what Yeshua himself said to do. They were doing it to the best of their ability, and they were teaching the Gentiles who were coming in the language so they could see the language. And they were not calling him by some other foreign name. They were calling him by his Hebrew name. Guys, this is powerful. This is powerful, powerful stuff. History, nobody's told us. Nobody shares with us. And yet it's right there. If you want to look, it's out there. And I'm only giving you the tip of the iceberg. So much more because I'm running out of time already. All right, names matter. Names absolutely matter. So in the 3rd century writings of Against the Heretics, he tells us they have the Gospel of Matthew in its entirety written in Hebrew as it was originally written. Well, here's Matthew chapter 1, verse 21. And you shall give birth to a son, and you shall call his name Yehusha, or Yeshua, for he shall save his people from their sins. That was written in Hebrew. That's the name they would have used. That's how they would have spoken of him. Acts chapter 4, verse 12. And there is no deliverance in anyone else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men whereby we need to be saved. Is the name important? The Nazarene thought it was important in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, all the way to the 13th century. And here we are today, 2,000 years from Messiah, and it's still important. I know it's been watered down. We've gotten it watered down. We've learned, the adversary is in charge of all the colleges and all the seminaries and all the places of higher learning and all the books and all the study. But even in the midst of all of that, our eyes are still opening up. Here's Philippians chapter 2, verse 9. Names matter. Elohim, therefore, has highly exalted him and given him the name which is above every name. I mean, if he's being this specific, if it's this specific, well, then it's that specific. That at the name of Yeshua or Yehusha, every knee should bow, of those in heaven and those on earth and those under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Yeshua, Messiah, is Master, and the glory of Elohim, the Father. The glory of Elohim, the Father, meaning the story the Father told, that Father spoke. What is the glory of God? Psalm 19, he spoke the story. So we, and by we I mean the Gentiles, starting at the end of the 1st century, all the way through, Constantine comes on, it just gets, a brand new religion just gets poured into the world. We changed the name. Not only did we change the name, we changed the story. Now, I know you can say, well, they changed the name because they couldn't say it. Really? I mean, really? That just doesn't fly for me. It doesn't fly for me. It doesn't matter what language you are today, because the whole world says Jesus. So, is that really the issue? They couldn't pronounce it? Well, I get it. Maybe there wasn't a word that was the equivalent. We'll get into that in just a second. But really, is it that hard? If you really want to know the one whose name is above every other name, the one that there is no other name, and you've got Jews there with the actual books to show you, there were people who took the time and made the effort and learned the language to call on him in the name to which he was actually given by the angel. That's who he is. And if he's that, then I want to take the time. I want to take the effort. I want to make that extra push to do the same. I want to know what this is really about, and I want to do what Abba has asked us to do. Here is, I'm right here so you guys can follow me. The name of the only name, Yod-He Vav-He, is the Tetragrammaton, Yod-He Vav-He, the four-letter name of Yah. So the name of Father is Yah. That's the poetic name. The longer version of it would be Yahuwah or Yahuwah. Later on, by the 1st century, it would be pronounced Yehovah. I'll get into why that is. I don't know about today, but at some point. So there's Yah and then Hosea. Hosea means saves. So his name literally has Father's name in it. Yah Hosea or Yahusha. Father saves. Abba saves. It's a sentence. In fact, all Hebrew names are sentences that reflect a person's position in Elohim, or what was going on in their lives, or their calling with Elohim. So Yahusha, the sentence, we can see the sentence if you open up, like today, if we've got concordances and stuff, we can go back and we can look this up. But in the 3rd and 4th century, they were learning it from their Jewish brethren in the synagogues as they were all opening it up, and they would show them, here's Isaiah chapter 12, verse 2. El is my deliverance. God is my salvation, because that's what deliverance means, salvation. I trust and am not afraid, for Yah, Yod-He Vav-He, is my strength and my song, and he has become my deliverance. Yah, or salvation. Yah has become my salvation. Yah, salvation. Yah, Hosea. Yah, Husha. Yeshua. That's what the name means. That's its intent. And you got to ask yourself, because you got to come to grips with this. What matters more? What matters more? A transliteration to a word that has maybe some phonics that are similar to the word in another language, or a word in another language that actually means what the first word means, so that you don't lose the meaning, so that it's still there. You see, to me, I think the translation matters. I think the meaning matters, especially now knowing, as we're starting to understand some things, like Genesis 1:1, the words matter. The meaning matters. What God is it? It is Yah. It is the God of Israel who is salvation. And again, that was definitely a problem with the people of that day. They did not like the idea that this was the God of Israel, that this was the God of the Jews. They did not like that idea, and they whitewashed it. By the 3rd century, it was gone. Even before that, it was gone. Here's some Hebrew names just to give you an idea. And if we've got the scriptures version, you'll see all the actual names of how they would be pronounced. And you can see in their names, the word Yah is in there all the time. Now, we've taken it out in sort of a modern English way, or even some of the modern Hebrew words. Like we would say the word Hosea. It's actually Hosea. Hosea, which also means Yahuwah or Yah saves. So names matter. Obadiah is Obadiah, worshiper of Yah. Jonah is Yana. You see the YAH, the Tetragrammaton, when you look at it in the way it would actually have been written in Hebrew, all of a sudden you realize, wait, Father's name is in their names, and their names are a sentence. It means the ornament of Yah. Micah is Micaiah. Zephaniah, Zephaniah. Daniel, Daniel, or actually Daniel or Daniel, Yah is my judge. Samuel, Shemuel. heard of Yah. Zechariah, Zechariah, remembrance of Yah. Paul, Shaul, asked of Yah. Joshua, Yahusha, Yeshua. Yah is salvation. Do names matter? Yes, they matter. Absolutely, absolutely, they matter. Now, here's the thing. I highlighted this before. Here it is. It appears from the Greek all the way through to the Latin. When they translated, when the Gentiles who were using this, who were using the name, not using the Hebrew part of it, it's been removed, it's been expunged. We already saw the conflict historically of what was going on by the book about the heretics. The IE in Esu was supposed to be a reference to God. And I know that the Jews wrote this too when they used the Septuagint. They used this name. It was a Greek name. Doesn't matter if they did it or not. They were serving Abba. Abba was trying to get his point across. And Abba will use whoever he wants to use to get his point across. And here's the point. I get it. The IE was a reference to God. Maybe even to Yah, you could say. The SOUS, though, does not mean salvation. So even if you were going for a word that kind of had God in it, even though you're really not describing what God it is, because in Hebrew, Yah is a specific God. He's not the God of the Phoenicians. He's not the God of the Babylonians. He's not a generic God. His name is in there. But even if you skip that and you just say, okay, generically it means God, Sous, S-O-U-S, in Greek, because as we're talking about Greek, does not mean salvation. So again, what means more to you? To have something that phonically sort of sounds a little bit like the original word, or a word that actually means what the original word means, or what the original word in Hebrew means? The word for salvation is soterion. It's number 4992 in your Strong's Concordance. You guys can look it up. And so if they were actually going to translate the meaning of what Yah salvation means, it would have been, and here it is, something like this: esoterion or esoteri. That would have been a name that means God is salvation or God saves. It doesn't tell us what God, it just says God saves. But that would be a whole lot closer. And here's the problem. This is out of the Dictionary of Christian Lore and Legend for SOUS. It is known that the Greek name ending in US, SEUS, SOUS were attached by the Greeks and the Romans to names and geographical areas as a means to give honor to the supreme deity Zeus. Here it is. Also later known as Apollos to the Romans. And just like we just finished seeing, just like we saw this in all of the Hebrew names, Yah is in the name. His name is there. He is present with his people in the name, including Messiah. His name is absolutely there. Here we see the same thing, and all peoples of the ancient world did this. Their names reflected their gods. Somehow, some way, their names also reflected their gods. So this US ending in Roman and Greek names was a reference to Zeus. Julius, and look at the list here. This is just a short list. I could probably go on for 10 minutes. Julius, Gaius, Paulus, Marcus, the Emperor Constantine, who creates Christianity as we know it. His name was Flavius, Valerius, Aurelius, Constantinus, Augustus. I mean, it's so evident. So now we've got a Greek name that does bear a name to it, a name even of a god. But it is not the God Yod-He-Vav-He. It is the name of another. And that one we received. Imagine if instead of calling his name today, instead of saying Jesus today, we said something like Jeduk for Marduk, the god for all the different killings of the kids and the burning in Marduk's hands. Or what if we called him Aigon or Jagon for Dagon? Or what if we called him Jailah or Jailah? Well, we would look at that and say, no, we can't do that. You're talking about Allah. You're talking about Dagon. You're talking about Marduk. Well, that's what SOUS means too. It's another name. It's another name. Say, oh, well, we're kind of splitting hairs. Abba splits hairs. That's why this takes wisdom. That's why people haven't figured this out. It took a long time for us to see it, to grow. And guys, just look at the pictures to the right there. Look at these pictures. These are those pictures of a Hebrew Messiah who is a prophet like Moses, born of Judah, in Judea, in Bethlehem, died on Passover, buried on on unleavened bread, rose on Shabbat, is the master of Shabbat. Are those pictures of a Hebrew Messiah, or are those pictures of a Greek God? Those are pictures of a Greek God. There is nothing Hebrew at all in any of those pictures. And we'll get into more of these pictures later because we're going to show you all the different things, that are in here. These are the emblems. All of these things we're going to talk about. These are the marks. These are the numbers. These are the things all Revelation is talking about. Okay. I did not want to go this long, so let's do this. Actually, I think I can't. All right. So what we'll do, guys, is we'll stop right here for now. Let me jump out of this. And that last verse is so important down there. Let me pop that up one more time. Remember, the master says, someone else is coming in his name, and him you will receive. Now, I know this is a lot of information. Go over the notes. Go online. Check out the stuff. You can find many, many more quotes than I showed you that show us the history of what was going on. Beloved, the Netzarim did not bow down to the modern Christian world of its day. They stood firm. And the enemy, the serpent, came after them because they kept the commandments of Elohim and the testimony of Messiah. And we need to do the same thing. Guys, we'll stop right here for now. I hope you enjoyed that. Go back, listen to it again. If you got questions and stuff, shoot them over to me. I'll do my best to try to answer them. We're going to go through this slowly. We're going to go through this real slowly because this could either be some really enlightening information like, oh my goodness, now I get it. Or this could be really, really mind-boggling and sad. It was mind-boggling for me when I first saw it. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe it because then you start wargaming this thing out and you realize, oh my goodness, you know what that means then? You know what this means for history? You know what this means for what's going on right now? And all of a sudden you start wargaming this thing and you realize, oh my goodness, this is bad. The serpent really has deceived the whole world. And yet Abba's people, just like you and I, Abba's people are in that world. And at some point, they'll hear his voice. And maybe it's because you'll say something, someone else will say something, maybe they'll hear a video, maybe you click like and it comes up on their feed and they listen and they see this and after all the anger and everything subsides, they start to think, hey, wait a minute, you know what? This is what the book actually says. And they become Netzarim. So anyway, hopefully that is the way things go. Guys, keep our world in prayer. It is some crazy, crazy times out there. But even in the midst of this, Abba is in control. His plan is working out perfectly. The story is unfolding. And the Mashiach is coming. Guys, have an awesome, awesome rest of the evening. Don't forget, guys, to subscribe. Appreciate that. Hit that bell and hit the likes. We really, really do need that. Get the LMC app and support us. We really appreciate it. Guys, have an awesome awesome rest of the night. See you tomorrow morning for our morning manna and Friday night for our hidden manna. Guys, Yah bless and shalom.